Hi, Tom. Baker's Dozen, number 13.
Hello, mate. Yes, indeed. Good stuff. Nice to see everyone. Hello.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. And it's 25 degrees again, so we're baking. We got your water next to you, ready to go?
Been roasting. Fabulous. No, I haven't, but I'm ready to go anyway.
Brilliant. Right, straight into number one, which is last weekend. And we both attended this event. It was next to outside the Drax estate, and hundreds of us turned up as part of the campaign to persuade him, shall we say, to hand back his estate in Barbados, which was taken during the period of slavery back in the 17th and 18th centuries. And the Barbadian people want it back. But he's, not unsurprising, I guess, because of who he is very reluctant. It was a good day, though, wasn't it? It was really very hot, but very good.
Yeah, baking hot day, but better than raining. And yeah, a fabulous event. Well over 200, potentially, I think around 300 people attended. And yeah, a fabulous event. People from all over Dorset and people from around the country, people from London, people from Bristol, people from Manchester came down because they felt it's an important issue. You bring up a Dorset Eye article all about it. Tell us a bit about that, Jace.
Yeah, well, I think the Guardian covered it, but I don't think, not from my knowledge anyway, anybody else covered the event, even though there were some journalists there,
including the Dorset Echo, who, despite numerous requests, seemingly refused to cover any issues to do with Drax and the things that he's hidden from the public. His failure to record things in the register of members' interest in the Commons, his failure to submit accounts to Companies House for 4 of his businesses over 11 years. This whole issue about the Drax Hall estate in Barbados and the widespread calls for him to do the right thing. The Echo, more than reluctant, they seemingly refused to cover any of that whilst giving him a weekly column.
Yeah, well, they're like conjoined twins, unfortunately, the Echo and Richard Drax. They weren't interested at all in the Labour MP that was in office in South Dorset between 2001 and 2010. But as soon as he stepped down and Richard Drax was elected, they were onto him like a rabbit down a hole and invited him to have a weekly column. I actually contacted him back in 2010 and offered to give an alternative voice, shall I say, and they said, "Oh, we're not interested at this time." And actually, it was part of one of the motivations behind creating Dorset Eye, because the Echo just seemed to be representing a very narrow, parochial, conservative viewpoint when it came to politics. And I felt that there were tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in Dorset who would actually prefer to hear something quite different. But yes, ever since he was elected in 2010, unfortunately, the Echo and Richard Drax have not been serving the community democratically via their implementation of the media. And it's not really surprising, I suppose, because the Dorset Echo is owned by NewsQuest, which is a huge American corporation. They're not interested in anything other than the balance sheet, really.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, this is about reporting facts. We're not talking about reporting a different political point of view or opposition to Drax per se. This is just about reporting the facts, reporting the truth to the people of Dorset, as opposed to hiding the truth and the facts from the people of Dorset. That's what it's about.
Yes, of course. But facts are often inconvenient, aren't they, as we both know, Tom? And the ones that are inconvenient are the ones that are hidden. The ones that are perceived to be convenient are the ones that are thrust right into the forefront, into the vanguard, into our face. And that's, unfortunately, from the corporate media perspective, that's what they call democracy. They show half of the coin and ignore the other half, or they denigrate the other half to make the other half appear much more majestic and much more legitimate, which is why we're here.
Indeed. And the article there, you just scanned through, scrolled through some of it for people to view. If you haven't seen it, great article on WWII that covers the event with video and photos and some description of what happened. There were fabulous speakers, you know, all sorts of different people, very, very knowledgeable people, historians, professors, you know, people with PhDs, far more knowledgeable than myself, who spoke, you know, with great knowledge and passion about the issue. And people, you know, ex-Lord Mayor of Bristol and Southwest leader of the Trade Unions Congress, and various other people, including people who were born and brought up in Barbados. So yeah, and you know, the call is not only for him to hand back the estate in Barbados, the Draxhall estate. First of all, the call is for him to respond to the government of Barbados, who've asked for him to engage in a discussion. And up to now, he has refused to engage in a conversation with them about it. And it's just appalling that this ex-slavery plantation in Barbados, where the Drax family made their fortunes, 150 million the guy is worth now. And they made their fortunes and bought these huge areas of land and properties in the UK that he benefits from now, from the most barbaric and abusive slavery. You know, the kidnapping of enslaved people from Africa and barbaric use of them to create profit. And at the end of which, the end of slavery, the Drax family were paid a sum of money that in today's terms is worth £3 million. And of course, we all as taxpayers have been paying for that enormous bill up until 2015, so
yes.
just 6 years ago. The bill for compensation paid to the slave owners, not to the slaves and their families, the former slaves, their families and ancestors to benefit from, but to the slave owners like the Drax family.
And this is actually
often, we've been paying for in our taxes.
This is actually often misunderstood as well, because I mean, I've seen people on social media saying all the reparations were paying back the victims, and you know, many of us have had to point out that it simply wasn't the case. And they even give evidence via links to say, oh, you know, the reparations stopped in 2014. Stop obsessing yourself about history. You know, I've had to point out we actually haven't read your own link, because your own link clearly states that the reparations never went to the victims, they all went to the plantation owners. And it's exactly. Crazy. You know, people just go onto Google, see a headline, put it down there and say, here you are. And it proves our point, not theirs. It's
hilarious.
weirdness.
And I mean, it wasn't reparations, it was compensation to the former slave owners.
Of course. Yes.
Staggering. So, and to this day, of course, you know, the 621 acre estate with its sugar plantation in Barbados is still owned by the Drax family, was inherited by Richard Drax after his father passed away, and he profits from it. And it's just staggering in this day and age that this incredibly wealthy and privileged man who's an MP in South Dorset in England is still profiting personally, financially from this estate in Barbados. And when the government of Barbados are asking for it to be handed back essentially to the people of Barbados, so that the Drax Hall building can be used as an educational resource and museum, so that people in Barbados, young people particularly, can learn about their history and learn about slavery, and so that the sugar plantation, the profits from it, can go to benefit the people of the island, to be spent on hospitals and schools and services to support them, instead of into the pockets of this rich privileged man in Dorset in England. He refuses to even discuss the issue with them. So anyway, Saturday's event was I think very successful in that a large number of people turned out to say this is just wrong, and the time is up now for Drax to engage in that conversation and ultimately to hand that land over to the Barbadian government and people.
Yes, and to finish off as well, if he refuses to come to the table and refuses to negotiate, then I suspect it's probably come a time when the Barbadian government, the Barbadian people say, okay, well, we'll take it back anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite feasible. And to be honest, I think it's only a matter of time before he does the right thing. He'll either do the right thing or he'll be forced to, or maybe the Barbadian government will take the land, the people will take it. Who knows? I think eventually it'll happen. I just think the longer he waits to engage in that discussion and to do the right thing, the more embarrassing it'll be for him when he ultimately, or ultimately does it. Yeah,
exactly. Right. Well, hopefully, fingers crossed then that he will see sense and the Barbadian people will get justice. That's all we can really hope for, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed.
Back to the Conservative Party as well, I suppose, again in a different sense, and the return of Dominic Cummings. Becoming a bit of it's probably past a trilogy now, isn't it? But the Dominic Cummings, the ghost of Dominic Cummings, I should say, zoops out the shadows every so often, with yet more detail of this corrupt and, I think the adjectives, to be fair, have run out, haven't they now, with Boris Johnson in this government. But this particular one, arguing that the second lockdown didn't need to take place, according to Dominic Cummings, reporting on the narrative of Boris Johnson, because it was only over 80s dying. And Boris Johnson at the time put out a tweet that showed that the average age for a man dying was 81 and the average age for a woman dying was 85. And that in both cases, he was arguing they were actually above the average for life expectancy for both sexes. And I believe he put out also something along the lines of get COVID, die older.
Yeah, live longer.
Live longer.
COVID, live longer. I'm not sure they were tweets. I think these were WhatsApp messages, weren't they?
WhatsApp. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Within a group of
yes.
people working in government.
Yes.
So yeah. So I mean, obviously, misunderstanding how some of that data and statistics work. The scientists have said since then, scientists have said very clearly, it's estimated that the average number of years of life that is taken from people dying of COVID in this country is 10 years. That's the average per person, per death, years of life lost. That's what the scientists have reported.
Yes.
Far from this idea that the government want to paint a picture that almost all the people dying at the very end of their lives have comorbidities and are about to die anyway. So no great loss. That's sort of a message they want to put out, and that's certainly what Johnson seems to have been suggesting when he was saying, it's only the over 80s, only the elderly dying. I'm not going to close the economy just for them to save their lives. Just sickening. And totally misunderstanding the facts that the scientists are saying. But just appalling, isn't it? That once again, and this comes on the back of Cummings previously revealing to the Times way back when he still worked in, I think when he still worked in government, that the approach was, get the economy back up and running as soon as possible. If some old people die, so be it. Do you remember that was reported in the Times, a year plus ago? Then, a month or so, 6 weeks ago, him disclosing some of the WhatsApp messages that included, obviously, Hancock at the start of the pandemic describing Johnson describing Hancock as effing hopeless. And then, but the huge one, which, as we discussed at the time, was not really covered by the media, was this image of the whiteboard at 10 Downing Street in Johnson's office with the question, who do we not save? Who do we allow to die, in other words? And we have our answer, as I've said before. That's, just shocking. So again, this again backs up that narrative for which Cummings has provided evidence that Johnson doesn't care about elderly people dying. The economically unproductive, the ones that the Tories see as a burden on the state, that cost money rather than bring money into the exchequer, despite a lifetime of working and contributing to the economy and everything that people have given to their countries in their various roles over their lives. The Tories don't give a stuff about that. If you're economically unproductive now, you're a burden on the state, and they're not that fussed about saving your life or keeping you alive.
I think it's I mean, we probably need to get a psychiatrist or a psychologist on here to help us to understand, perhaps, or at least partially understand, some of the behaviour patterns that go on within this present government, or the government, to be fair, going back to 2010 and before that. But it is interesting. I find that Dominic Cummings's pronouncements have enabled us to understand that actually this isn't necessarily some evil plan. Unless Dominic Cummings is in himself a stooge in order to present a viewpoint to provide us with misinformation. But I thought very interesting about his discussion about the Queen and how Boris Johnson, at the time in which the COVID epidemic began, he hadn't even considered that he wouldn't be able to go and see the Queen each week. And it was only when Dominic Cummings pointed out to him that because he'd had COVID, that he could, or before he had COVID, or around that time, that he could give the Queen COVID, who was in her 90s, and she could die. And he hadn't thought of it. Now, what level of sociopathy or psychopathy do you have to reach where you don't think about visiting an old person or an elderly person and the consequences of the COVID, bearing in mind that he was standing at the podium along with his ministers every day, from Monday to Friday, telling the country how to behave, answering questions from the media, and yet he wasn't even considering his own behavior of visiting an elderly person. And therefore, as a result of that, he didn't visit the Queen for 15 months and only started again in June. Yeah. Well, I'm kind of hoping that that's been knocked on the head as well.
Now.
It's not that I've got any sympathy towards the Queen or any person in particular. It's the understanding of the behavior of a single individual who has all this power and responsibility, is saying all these things to the general public, and doesn't even recognize that he has to do it himself.
No, I mean, these Johnson, and people need to understand that, as I've mentioned before, the old-fashioned, more moderate, one-nation conservatives have gone now. They've been expelled by the Tory party. They've got rid of them. We have a bunch of psychopaths and fascists in charge of our country, empathy-free. Anyone with empathy and understanding of other humans, consideration, would not be talking about culling the elderly in the way that Johnson is, would not be, and would be thinking about the threat they might pose to an elderly person like the Queen. But they're oblivious to it because these are empathy-free psychos running the country who worship at the altar of power and wealth, and that's their only concern. It's people need to understand that this is the most extreme right-wing fascistic government that we've certainly ever had in my lifetime, possibly ever in the history of the country. These people are in many ways not sane. And we see that in so many ways in their response to issues like climate change, where they're pretending that they're making taking world-beating action that amounts to virtually nothing. They don't care. They don't care, and they don't care. They're storing up problems even with their response now to things like the Delta variant. They don't care about people with long COVID. because in a couple of years' time, you know, they'll all have left their jobs. You know, Johnson, as Cummings mentioned, you know, he doesn't want to be prime minister forever. He wants to go off and make loads of money, as prime ministers do. So, you know, he doesn't care if he's storing up problems for future prime ministers, for the country, for our health service, for millions of people that might be suffering from long COVID in the future. He doesn't care. He'll be off doing the after dinner speech circuit and making his 50 million quid, mostly in America. These are empathy-free psychopaths that only care about power and money. And people need to understand that pretty quick, and vote for something different.
Yeah, and that's a great place to end. I mean, my last point.
Yeah, go on. I have one last point after you, Jace. Go on.
Yeah, my last point would also be, though, that it wasn't just the Queen, was it? It now helps us to understand, and it wasn't just Boris Johnson, the care home policy. Matthew Hancock and a number of other people in and around that inner, I would say inner sanctum, more like inner scrotum, but that particular group of people just mishandled it. It wasn't even necessarily and sitting down, creating an evil ideology that we're going to impose on the country. It was just, I think, as much as it was that, but it was also as much of it was incompetence. They simply don't understand what the public on a day-to-day basis are experiencing, because they're away from it all in their own little bubble.
Yeah, and 39,000 people died in care homes.
Yes,
39,000, and all they've done, having not had a plan, lied about it, acted incompetently, caused this huge number of deaths amongst our elderly relatives, and all they do is lie about it.
Yeah.
And on the subject of sort of lying and covering up things, my final point on this was about the media. So Cummings does this interview, again, revelatory, pointing out that the Prime Minister himself has said him being Prime Minister is ludicrous, pointing out that our Prime Minister of this country was more than happy to sacrifice the lives of potentially 3 million people in this country that are over the age of 80 in order to protect profits for the rich. And after that incredible revelation, which again, like I said, when we've discussed these things before, if it was a Labour government, that would be all over the front page of every newspaper, top of the news on every TV channel, and massive calls for the whole government to resign. What's been the big story the last 24 hours since Cummings made these revelations? Some brown people coming here on boats, all over the news, top of the BBC News at 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, lunchtime, front page of every newspaper. And that's coordinated between the government and their wealthy billionaire friends that own the media. It's just coordinated distraction. And it's sickening, absolutely sickening.
Yeah. Well, the corporate billionaire media is, their number one demographic is racist bigots. Well, we know that by now. And they play to it, and they play to it, and they play to it, and they turn up the amplifier so it gets louder and louder and louder. Then they turn it down, then they turn it back up. And that's the whole psychological profile. You don't keep the music on loud, you keep turning the music up and down, up and down. So it becomes like a wave. And that has a much more of a dramatic effect upon our consciousness than almost any other format or any other model. Well, moving completely away from the government and on to the second part of our interviews. Last week we talked about conservative voters who became ex-conservative voters, and this week we spoke to Labour voters who've become ex-Labour voters to discuss their rationale. So here we are. Hi Lizzie and Damien, welcome to 10 by 6.
Hi there.
Hello.
Both well?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, cooled down a bit, which is nice.
Yes, absolutely. We've been out for a nice walk today. We're following on in our series of interviewing people as to why they make the transition from one party to another, or by simply stopping voting for a particular party. Last week we looked at Conservatives. This week we're going to look at Labour Party or non-Labour Party voters. So we're just going to focus specifically on the transitional process from when you began to vote Labour and why you did so, to the point where you are now, where you're not prepared to vote for Labour, and just discussing why. So Damien, if you want to kick us off with your rationale as to initially why you started to vote for the Labour Party.
Well, how old was I? I joined the party just after the election that Neil Kinnock lost, and I was devastated that Labour had lost. I'd read a book called Making Our Way, which was written by Kinnock, and I just realised that I was a Labour Party supporter. I'd never really thought of joining the party before. I don't think you do when you're sort of 16, 17. But I was at college in London at the time, and I remember I bought a book called Livingstone's Labour, which was written by Ken Livingstone, and it just blew my mind, you know, having gone through school and university, that what I was reading in that particular book, it made me so excited. And I really believed, you know, when I was reading that book, that my life had changed forever, because it was the most exciting thing I'd ever read, and it covered all sorts of topics, women's rights, Ireland, and then it got me really interested in foreign policy in particular. So anyway, I joined the Labour Party. I was of the opinion at that time that perhaps the Labour Party would never win another election, and then Tony Blair came along, and I was a big supporter of him. And looking back, obviously I regret that I was sort of fooled by him, but I used to go to Labour conference and have a great time, you know. But life became really exciting then. And when you've got your leader who stands up at conference and says, this is the generation that could save all further generations from the scourge of war, you get really excited and you feel like you're a part of it. The fact that he was a liar working with Mandelson to change the party fundamentally from what it was into what it is today. I also read a book by John Pilger, and again that blew my mind, and I suddenly realized that Blair was not on my side. He was on the side of weapons manufacturers, of you know, trying to control and tame democracy. I mean, he could have reformed the House of Lords. I mean, look at the Commons today. It's an absolute antiquated mess, and he was not the radical person that he was portrayed as. And obviously when he went to meet Murdoch, I assumed he was just going to use Murdoch and get him on board in order to promote Labour policies, but the opposite was true. You know, he used Murdoch to basically follow Murdoch's agenda and get good coverage. So anyway, the Iraq War, I was virtually ready to leave the party anyway when the Iraq War sort of raised its head, and I left the party probably 5 months before the war began, and I joined Stop the War. And again, I had an amazing time working with Stop the War, where you met proper sort of activists who actually knew what was properly going on in the world. Because, you know, having joined the Labour Party, there were some people in the party who literally knew nothing about how the world works, and they probably joined because their parents, you know, were in the Labour Party. And obviously Tony Blair changed the nature of it and tried to attract people, you know, from big business and all these walks of life where Labour Party, you know, it's not really there to represent those kinds of people. But because Blair was trying to change the party fundamentally, it changed, and the MPs we got were parachuted in. So I think this is where the problem began, really, with you know, the difficulties that Corbyn had. He may have been the leader, and it may have been an accident that he became leader, but when you've got the MPs against you, it's virtually impossible, really, to become Prime Minister, I would say, looking back on it now.
So did you, before we move on to you, Lizzie, did you, at the point when you became disenchanted with Tony Blair and you joined Stop the War, did you stop voting for Labour?
It really depended, actually. Sometimes I did vote Labour, sometimes I simply didn't vote at all. When I wasn't a member, I did vote Lib Dem at some point. I've also voted Green. But, you know, the problem with us living in this area is that it doesn't really matter what you vote. My vote has never counted. So, you know, the way I deal with politics, I don't see my vote as being particularly useful to me, but activism has been, and I I rejoined the party eventually. You know, I left before the Iraq war, and then I came back simply because of Jeremy Corbyn, because I knew that he was the sort of person who was not a liar and was not going to try and fob you off. And he actually said what he believed. And years ago, I decided I'm only ever going to become an activist for a cause which is what it is meant to be. You know what it says on the tin. So I came back, and the Corbyn experience was brilliant because, you know, we became the biggest political party in Europe. And that got me excited. And the fact that young people wanted to join, if you were a young Lib Dem, you must have been looking at all these enthusiastic young people joining the Labour Party, and they must have been so tempted to jump ship. And when you see him at Glastonbury, you know, it takes a particular kind of person with principle to be able to get young people excited. And what did the people do that Blair brought in? They started calling these young people cult members, and it makes you so sick, because in this country we've been trying to get young people interested in politics, and that is the response of these sourpusses, to just call these young people naive cult members. And it's disgusting that something so positive like having 500,000 members was, well, you know, how could they deal with something so positive and turn it into a negative? We know now, and obviously the whole problem with the Labour Party, and why I would never join it again now, is because it is so corrupt. The people at the top of the party who control it and discipline people, the leaked Labour report proved how corrupt it is, and we've got all the evidence we need now. I mean, as a Corbynite, thinking, well, Corbyn's the leader, but this party isn't changing quick enough, and suddenly you get to conference, and, you know, reform and democratizing the party isn't on the agenda anymore. And of course, it's because of this corruption. It's what Blair did. He got control of the levers of the party, and there was a lot of nepotism and jobs for the boys. And so this sort of loyalty towards Blair's politics, it stayed with the party. And as soon as a proper opposition leader came along, like Corbyn, somebody who they despised, they had the means to be able to stop this, what seemed like an unstoppable force. And I think it took us by surprise, really, because I was really enthusiastic that nothing could stop us at one point. You know, when you've got that many people joining enthusiastically and getting out for elections, delivering leaflets and en masse and enjoying doing it, you thought, how could anybody stop this? But of course they did, and it's been a lesson learned.
Thank you, Damien. When was the first year, Lizzie, that you voted Labour? Can you remember?
Well, I've only ever voted Labour, and that is because I never voted, ever. In my professional life, I knew how corrupt government was, just as corrupt as the media was. And so I never felt that it represented me. It was just something to put blocks in the way of anybody with a socialist ideal in their body. So yeah, the first time I voted Labour, or voted at all, was for Jeremy Corbyn.
Right. Okay. So that late.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So in terms of what your sympathies, when you met politicians, or you saw them on television, or you watched Question Time or whatever, where did your sympathies lie before Jeremy Corbyn?
I was a reporter, a journalist, so of course I've met the whole gamut of politicians, and I knew how corrupt they were. I didn't ever meet Jeremy Corbyn until he popped up on the ballot for leader of the Labour Party. I liked Ed Miliband, thought he was a decent fella who was trying his best, and he had a rather entitled background, but simply because of the hard work of his father. And I think that he used that platform that he was born to very well in defense of ordinary people. but the whole system is corrupt, always has been corrupt. And so for a while, when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the party, I thought that like Damien, that we were an unstoppable force, because it was just common sense policies. You know, who doesn't want to save our NHS? Who wants it privatized? Nobody, except of course the ones who are going to profit from it. So you know, the original question that you asked, who did I support beforehand? Broadly Labour. I had a lot to do with the Conservatives, are very big on their largesse. You know, they have pots of money, and they have all the power and the control. So they would open up food banks, soup kitchens, devote their time to helping the disabled or the poor. But it was always at their discretion. You know, oh, I'm so good, I do this for my community. So that wasn't how I believed that this country, at least, should be run. I believed, and I still believe, that everybody is entitled to a decent standard of living. At least, you know, everybody is entitled to free dental, health, eye, ear, you know, in complete care, for free, regardless of how much money you have. I enjoyed the private practices that that catered to those with obscene wealth. And if you've got the money, yes, go private and leave the NHS waiting lists for other people who can't afford to pay for their care. And I was pretty okay with that, although, you know, but it was the what happened to me was I fell ill, and I fell quite seriously ill, burned through my savings, wasn't able to work, and met the world of benefits. And my God, what a trauma. That was a complete trauma in and of itself. You know, that was my illness. My illness was nothing as compared to the world of benefits. And I went on TV, I went on the radio, I went on the Vic Derbyshire show, and I shouted out loud about the fact that, my God, I'm going to get better. You know, I'm left with conditions, yes, but I'm not going to be disabled forever, totally. So, but what about all those people who are never going to get better, who need that care and support? And there is none left, you know, and you can paper over the cracks as much as you like, and that's what got me going. It was the fact that the NHS was being privatized. I mean, of course, it was being privatized 40 years ago, and Thatcher started it off. It was the last remaining public service. The water had gone, the gas and electric had gone, the trains had gone, the buses had gone, everything public service had gone. And the only thing left was the most profitable and the dearest to people's hearts was the NHS. So that's taken them 40, 50 years now, isn't it? And they're at the final hurdle now. And I don't know how we're going to stop it. I don't know if we can stop it, but and that was why when Jeremy Corbyn came along, it just worked out so fantastically in so many ways, which I'll enlarge upon if you're interested in hearing after you've had your say.
Thanks, Lizzie. I mean, Damien, is there anything there that corresponds in terms of your experience, or is there anything there in terms of Lizzie's experience that certainly wasn't anything that motivated yourself?
I've always been lucky. I'm a single chap, and I've always worked in this area. I've always taken a break between jobs I was a civil servant for 13 years, working at the DWP and the DVLA, and I've also worked for Barclays Bank. So, you know, I've had a pretty good life, really, and it's allowed me time to follow my hobbies and interests, which happens to be politics. So, you know, I'm glad to have had that experience, certainly. But I say, I just keep looking back at it. It's been a very good learning experience, and it's the sheer corruption of not only the country, but the Labour Party. And I think it's this corruption which holds us back. And what allows this corruption to flourish is, well, I pin 75% of the blame on the BBC, because there are certain topics which I say I still have my mind blown by some of the content on things like the Jimmy Dore show and the grey zone. For example, America is occupying a third of Syria against all international laws. They're trying to starve the people of Syria into submission illegally, because they're actually occupying the sort of breadbasket areas where the food is produced. They're also stealing the oil, and that's not obviously a conspiracy theory, because Donald Trump opened his big mouth and said we're there to take the oil. So that is not reported on the BBC. The BBC will tell you that we're on the side of the Syrian people, and yet we're actually keeping quiet about the fact that America occupies a third of Syria and is trying to starve the people because they couldn't beat them by bombing them. So, and of course, you know, if we
can bring it back, if we can bring it back to just to Labour and focus on, I mean, obviously, you know, in terms of the BBC, have been identified very clearly as being culpable in the lack of success that Jeremy Corbyn had both in 2017 and 2019, but you know, the wider media as well.
Okay, so if I'm talking about stories that don't get covered, obviously the leaked Labour report, you know, people were getting suspended, investigated, expelled. In a lot of cases, they were not even told, you know, what they were being charged with, and some people were simply being dumped in suspension. And some people have been waiting 3 or 4 years for the party to deal with it. Now, the leaked Labour report actually gave us smoking gun evidence to say that the party at the top was rife with corruption. And obviously, there were people there getting paid membership fees, you know, as a wage, who wanted us to lose the general election, and the BBC had nothing to say about that. They've got the evidence there, hard evidence, saying that what they were reporting is actually the opposite of what was happening. And of course, they had plenty to say about anyone who wanted to accuse anyone in the Labour Party of anti-Semitism. The BBC is an utterly corrupt organisation. We like their news. We like their documentaries. The children like the children's programs. We all grow up with them, but the news output is diabolical, and it's just lies of omission all the time. They could, if Corbyn had been going around COVID wards at the start of the pandemic, shaking their hands and then saying, I've been shaking hands with COVID patients today. If that had been Jeremy Corbyn, he would have been hounded out of office. They would have said, is this the most stupid man in the universe, or at least on this planet? Because the guy, Boris, is a buffoon. We all know that, much more of a buffoon than Corbyn. And yet the BBC want to give Boris a free pass most of the time, and Corbyn, he could do nothing right, even though he had the support of 500,000 people who joined the party in order to support him, and all those young people, and basically the establishment screwed them over.
Thank you. In terms of, just to finish off, both of you, can we just focus on what major differences would you say are there between Jeremy Corbyn's Labour and how he perceived moving forward and Keir Starmer? Because what we are seeing is that the membership of the Labour Party is hemorrhaging massively. We're not talking about a capillary here, we're talking about a major artery in terms of membership of the Labour Party. And there's been so much criticism, certainly from the left, of the way in which the Labour Party is now operating. So can we just finish off, if you start off with Lizzie, with just some major differences from your perspective of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour and Keir Starmer's Labour?
Well, to start it off with the ending, I will not vote Labour again. I should probably go back to not voting at all, unless it's an independent. I believe that Jeremy Corbyn, what he did very successfully was awakened a political intent in everybody, in so many people, almost everybody, even if it was to hate him due to the BBC, etc., propaganda. It still awakened a political drive in so many people. And what he also did was he brought all the people, all the members and non-members into the party, and he enabled independent media. And there was he was going to, if he had been successful, he was going to fund independent media so that we had a broader view of opinions. And also he was going to do so many things, and all the people that created these plans of what he was going to do, that supported the policies he put out, and they were all economically viable and indexed. So all the people that created all these plans were ordinary people like you or me. And we all had office space made available to us in the House of Commons if we needed it, or Labour HQ, to finalise these plans or to draw them up and to execute them. So that stopped dead on the moment he lost the 2019 election. He was removed, basically. He was removed from all aspects of the Labour Party. So now none of us in independent media can speak to a member of the House of Commons, a member of the Labour Party. We don't know any of them. If we do speak to them, it's the ones, the usual ones. Jeremy Corbyn will come out, but he has to be a bit careful about who he speaks to, you know, what platform he uses to speak. And John McDonnell, that's about it, I think. You know, Clive Lewis, perhaps a little bit. Clive Lewis, and Richard Bergen speaks out, but he doesn't tend to come out onto anybody's platform and speak. Like, you can't invite him onto your show. But so what Starmer did was he's closed down all public involvement, and he's returned it to the corrupt arms of the establishment, the arms industry, the private health industry, the Israel lobby, and I'm sure there are other, the corrupt media moguls. There are other people that he's now in bed with, but it's definitely not with the people of this country, and it's definitely not with the members of the Labour Party.
All right, thanks, Lizzie. Damien, have you anything to add to that? And there's something else as well. It concerns me is that where we have the idea of Jeremy Corbyn liberating the Labour Party and democratising it, it strikes me that what Keir Starmer has done is largely the opposite, and his apparatchik behind him are very much supportive of undemocratising, if you follow me, the Labour Party. So is that something that you've noticed and concerns you, just to finish off?
I mean, certainly Corbyn was stopped from democratising the party, and if anything, I think we're going to go backwards. There will not be more democracy in the party. And as to the future, you know, whether I agree with enough Labour policies to vote for them again, looking at it, I doubt it. But to trump all of that is, I made a complaint in 2018, which the party has still never. They've still never dealt with it. So every time I get a message from the Labour Party now, I simply write back and say, I'm doing nothing for you. I'm not going to be an activist. I'm not going to deliver a leaflet. I'm going to do zero until you deal with my complaint from 2018. I actually wrote to David Evans because the EHRC said legally the Labour Party now needs to run a proper complaints system. I sent 2 letters to David Evans saying, I've got a complaint sat in your inbox from 2018, which still hasn't been dealt with. And he ignored both of those letters. So I've gone back to the EHRC to say that the Labour Party is still running a complaint system which discriminates between those who are Corbynites and those who aren't, because the only reason they're not dealing with my complaint is that the party, when I had some correspondence with them, accidentally sent me material that they failed to redact. So I found out about some of the corruption that was going on up at HQ. And so my complaint was about, what are you going to do about this corruption? And that's why they're not releasing the Ford report. That's why they're not dealing with my complaint, because when you have evidence and you try to use the complaint system, they literally ignore you, unless, of course, you're on the other side and they want to expel you. So, you know, I'm not going to vote Labour in future simply at the moment because they have not dealt with my complaint. They are not treating members with respect and dignity. If I had enough money, I would sue the party and I would win hands down. I've already been to the police about this corruption, and the only people who aren't interested in it, because I do have a police crime number, the only people not interested in it is the Labour Party. And if the Labour Party is watching this, my case is CN 2172, and it's been sat in your inbox for nearly 4 years, and not even a direct letter to David Evans has managed to get my complaint even looked at. So, you know, disillusioned, yes, I would love to leave the party, but because I've got this ongoing complaint, I can't leave the party because it'll give them an excuse not to have to deal with it. So that's where I am.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lizzie. Thank you so much, Damien, for coming on the show. It seems to me that the Labour Party has a rod almost going down straight down through it at the moment. And you've got those on the left who are very much saying, we're not going to vote for you again until you conform to our perception of what the Labour Party should look like. But then you've got another group, and all they want to say is, oh, well, if you don't vote for the Labour Party, you're just going to keep the Conservative Party in forever. And I guess what the left then respond with is, well, if you get the current Labour administration in to replace the Conservative Party, you are in effect keeping the Conservative Party in forever, just like we were with Blair. So
yeah, there's no difference between the two. It's
a horrible muddle. It's a horrible mess. And I think it also comes back, just to sum up, the way you both discussed the idea, especially you, Lizzie, talked about the voting system, because the vote, and so did you, Damien, that the voting system in that our votes don't count. Until we change the voting system radically, when all of our votes count, we're just left with what we have, aren't we? 2 establishment parties who will go on probably for forever.
And the fact that Jeremy Corbyn couldn't change that in four and a bit years of leadership position just tells you all you need to know about how much control he had of the party mechanism. He never had any control of the party mechanism. He was always fighting the same as us. It's just that he was leading that fight with all of us. And now we haven't even got a leader. But grassroots activism's where it's at, people. You know, go on the protests, go on the demos, share everybody's posts, WWII posts, Unity News posts, all independent media posts. Share the hell out of them, and let's get people told the truth.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sophie, for coming on the show. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jason. Bye, Lizzie.
Well, for an excellent discussion, Tom, and I suspect in the future, again, we'll look at other people who are prepared to come forward and discuss it, and also talk about some of the other political parties or ideas that they would like to see implemented, or ideas that they want to abandon. But that's for another day. Next topic we're moving on to is the rise of COVID, and specifically the completely muddled policy that we've seen all week in regarding to the app pinging on people's mobile phones, alerting them that they've been in contact with somebody who's been prescribed as COVID-19 or one of the variations of it. But specifically, we're going to focus not nationally in this slot, but on the Southwest, because the Southwest has been identified, Dorset, Devon, Cornwall, that sort of area, has been identified as one of the fastest growing. So even though it hasn't got huge numbers of people with COVID, it must be recognised, of course, that the population is a lot more sparse in the Southwest because it hasn't got many built-up conurbations, with Exeter, Plymouth, probably being the two largest. If you build in Bristol as well, they're probably the largest, but they don't really compare to some other the major cities. So when people look at the figures, they shouldn't think, oh, there's not really a problem here, because they have to remember there's a lot less people. And as the government data suggests, that the growth rate at this point in time, the Southwest is one of the highest. As you can see from the government data here, you've had the R rate now has moved from 1.2 to 1.5, and the growth rate percentage per day from 4 to 8. So it's doubled, which is dramatic. And we don't need to go through this. People can just go online and check out government website and the guidance around COVID and the statistics. But what I want to focus more on in relation to the Southwest is some of the articles and information that we've had on WWII. For example, if we look at the conurbation in and around Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, it's now among the 3 worst UK hotspots for COVID. And why is that? Significantly because of tourism, people coming down to the beaches, the size of the populations in those 3 areas of the conurbation expanding dramatically, obviously with the hot weather and the attraction of the coast. So those particular populations, and I see many of them again on social media, complaining by the fact that, they live here, they've done everything they're supposed to be doing. Suddenly the economy's opened up. Suddenly the tourist areas in and around Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole have bloated. And now the chances of them getting COVID are significantly increased through no fault of their own. So that's obviously an issue, and it needs to be taken account of. And when we talk about putting the economy over health, we have to realise that when we put the economy over health, it then has a dramatic effect upon health, which then has a dramatic reverse effect back on the economy. So it becomes a vicious circle. So people sort of saying, a sticker box and say the economy is more important than our individual health, they really need to think this through. And we've got public services being affected, of which this is just one, where we have the BCP now have found that a lot of their staff employed for refuse collecting have been pinged, and as a result of being pinged, they've gone off work. And we've seen this in the news cycle over the last 3 or 4 days in terms of retail, in terms of food and stocking shelves in supermarkets, in terms of lorry drivers being able to get food to supermarkets. A whole number of different institutions and different services have really, really struggled. And then you have a government minister coming on this morning, which we've got an article on the site, which I won't go into now. He's in almost virtual denial that these supermarkets across the country have empty shelves, and saying it's just in little pockets around the country. Well, I know for a fact there's 3 supermarkets on my doorstep where the shelves are virtually empty. And this is, an area where lots of tourists are coming in. And there's suddenly, as I say, there's a much more bloated population. So demand goes up. And at the same time, supply isn't matching it. In fact, supply is falling well short. So here we have, again, holidaymakers and the sort of indigenous local people of the population in the area, both of them now in a real struggle in order to get basics. But if we then revert back to the ping discussion, which was, all over the news. And as I said, it was first highlighted by the BBC at the beginning of the week. We aren't met with a government that's perceived to be good at planning. We have a government that's constantly being criticised and making up on the hoof. And we have a government who seems to be most of the time pandering to the rich donors of the Conservative Party, completely over the interests of the rest of the population, knowing that there's not a general election around the corner to 2024. And it's also interesting to see the polls that have come out this morning, which people were incredulous at in the last few weeks and months, saying, how the hell can the Tories still be that far ahead of Labour, given the pandemic and the crisis? Well, we know why the Tories are so far ahead of Labour. It's because we have a leader of the Labour Party and a shadow cabinet who, when it comes to measuring their value, you need a microscope. And even then you're struggling. So that's why they haven't got a strong leader. They haven't got a strong principled person, but we don't need to go into all that now. So the Tories have effectively been let off the hook. But their ability to plan, their ability to reassure the public in practical terms is now almost completely zilch. And as I said before, the essence of the election being 3 years away means that they are well and truly off the hook at this time, because there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, and they're 80-seat majority, so they can vote through anything they want to vote through, and they are doing. Yeah, very worrying. Yeah, I mean, there's lots in what you say. Obviously, the picture is very worrying again. The Delta variant's running wild. The government, since the government Johnson made his announcements about Freedom Day, it's just a ridiculous term in the first place.
But on Twitter, it was called Freedom Day.
Freedom Day, yeah. I mean, obviously, a stupid populist term, but also a term that gives people completely the wrong idea. So it's dangerous. And so when a couple of weeks ago he made his announcements about, no longer mandating social distancing and mask wearing, he didn't originally do so with the strong, scientific and sort of medical public health message that people still should socially distance and wear masks in certain instances, indoors, etc. It was all a message of freedom and the end of lockdown measures, and they get called restrictions. I'm always interested in semantics. It's fascinating. They get called restrictions, lockdown rules, and we don't like rules and restrictions, so we celebrate their lifting. That's a very deliberate ploy. So they're deliberately called restrictions. They're not called preventative health measures. Yay, we're getting rid of preventative health measures. Yeah, that sounds a bit different, doesn't it? That sounds a bit dumb and dangerous. So there's important things to recognise about the semantics being used and how the public respond to those words. But the truth of the matter is, yes, we're getting rid of the government mandate for preventative health measures that saves lives. But the important thing was that, he has reeled back to some extent over the last couple of weeks by saying that public health message that people still should. But by then it's too late. People hear the first message, and as always, the government know this. They put something out that's untruthful or incorrect or gives people a certain impression. They deliberately put it out there. Then they reel it back or say something slightly different, knowing that half the population will only hear or read about the first thing and tell each other and post on social media about the first thing. So many people have said, yay, we don't have to socially distance or mask wear anymore. That's not what was being said. That's not what's happening. What's happening is the government have removed the legal mandate for those things that come with punishment if you don't. That's what they've removed. But the message is still very much that people should socially distance and mask wear in those sort of situations where they're indoors, on public transport, unable to socially distance, etc.
If you're in a position where you are a 44% victory in terms of the coverage of the electorate at the last general election, and you have 56% who voted elsewhere. The only thing that leads the 56% to agree with the government is when they're forced to by law. So you bring in the restrictions, and the restrictions can be across the board, in terms of going out of the house, in terms of going to the workplace, in terms of using public transport, accessing your local A&E, or whatever it might be. They are molding your behavior. You have no choice unless you want to break those restrictions, break those laws, which then lead on the one hand maybe to criminalization, but on the other hand, certainly for the middle classes, they're just as worried about how it makes them look in the public. So if it's reported in the press that a particular person has contravened these rules and regulations, then often they're much more worried about the social perception, or they are worried about the social perception, is that they are about getting a slap on the wrist from a local police officer. So we have to be also looking at human behavior. And in the Southwest, what we have is we have hundreds of thousands of tourists who've descended upon this part of the country, who've made that choice to leave their homes for whatever reasons, to come down to the Southwest. Now, if they're not abiding by the regulations that are in place before the 19th of July, that is mask wearing, socially distancing, then they're bringing that antisocial behavior. It's not on their doorstep. It's not their neighbours who are, looking at them and tutting. It's a population that they might never come in contact with again, who's having to experience this. Because when you look on social media, most of the people locally, they blame, especially if you look at last summer, with all those issues around Lulworth. So many people, Poole, Bournemouth, Swanage, so many people on social media were saying it's because we're being swamped by all these Londoners and all these people from Birmingham. They're coming down here, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then they're going home and they're leaving the debris behind. Well, the same sort of situation's happening now. Apart from this year, they're being given a serious green light by the government.
Yeah.
So we need to be understanding what it is about the Southwest and certain other places in the country that's leading to this outcome. And we haven't got any more time now, but I think the people in the Southwest really should be questioning what it is that's allowing large swathes of people to come down. Because as we talked about before, yes, the economy can grow, but at what cost? And if the cost is the contamination of local populations, eventually, as we're seeing with BCP Council and other key workers, etc., it has a dramatic effect on the economy. So it's about not allowing the government and their indecisions and their no planning and their contempt sometimes for most of us to let them tell us what to do. We need to be doing what's best for us. And we need to be uniting. So, for example, if it's not safe to go to the beach, don't go to the beach. If it's not safe to go into town and be commercial in terms of buying from shops, restrict the number of times that you go, etc., etc. If it's not safe to send your child to school, as a parent, you should be making those decisions. We should not be allowing government ministers to determine whether we live or die, based on some ideological illusion that actually it will make the economy better and therefore it makes society better for us all, because it simply doesn't work like that. And I think that leads in nicely to what you were saying at the beginning of this. It leads in very nicely to the next topic, which is about the number of government U-turns, because the number of government U-turns that we have seen are not only incredible in their number, because we saw Jeremy Corbyn forced Theresa May into a whole number of U-turns, but it's the speed. In some cases, there's a U-turn within hours and sometimes minutes of the policy being announced.
Yeah,
because the wave of frustration and anger that then swamps the government, because yet again they have no idea how the public are thinking.
Yeah, And can I just say that the latest one, we mentioned pings earlier, the latest one is about the pings, in that Paul Scully, business minister, government business minister, a couple of days ago, came out in the morning and said that people should ignore pings from the NHS COVID app. If they're pinged saying they have to self-isolate, they should ignore that. He essentially said that in the morning. There was such outrage about that by the afternoon, 10 Downing Street issued a statement saying that people shouldn't ignore pings and they should or must self-isolate. So it's just yet another U-turn. And, you know, there's a strong suspicion, at least, that was all planned. You know, that they pushed him out there to tell people, ignore the pings. Loads of people will hear that. Not everyone will hear the retraction.
Yeah, and Keir Starmer actually made an extremely interesting and valid point in Prime Minister's questions yesterday, when he said it was interesting how the 3 government ministers, including Boris Johnson, who'd been pinged, all happened to be on their country estates at the time. So it wasn't like they were inconvenienced. They're at home surrounded by their sways of wealth when suddenly they announced to the public that they'd been pinged. Interesting that they probably were pinged when they were doing their jobs back in Whitehall in Downing Street, but they decided not to tell the public until they were home on their country estates. Why don't the public wake up to this type of stuff? Do you know what I mean? It is frustrating. And you're absolutely right.
And of course, they Johnson and was it Sunak?
Yeah,
the other one stated that. Oh, Gove, sorry, Johnson and Gove.
Sajid
Javid, who was tested positive, and it was Gove and Johnson, that had been in close contact with him. Hence, they were pinged. And of course, they immediately said that they were going to ignore the pings because they were part of some special pilot. You know, they were on some privileged pilot program that meant they could ignore being pinged and wouldn't have to self-isolate. And of course, fairly quickly, you know, they realised that that wouldn't go down at all well with the public, who would be rightly outraged about that notion, you know, and say once again, it's one rule for them and another rule for us. So again, that's something
who advises them, Tom?
Rode back and said they would self-isolate.
Who's whispering in their ear? Who's saying blame it on the pilot? Who is saying? Because all week they've been questioned by innumerable presenters on different TV stations saying, when are the rest of us going to get on this pilot? And they just say, oh, when the time is right, we'll make an announcement. And they're saying, well, we haven't got the time. Why can't you tell us now? Oh, you know, I can't do that right now. It'll come out in good time. When's good time? And this morning, and there's a particular one, where Kwasi Kwarteng, or whatever his name is, 14 minutes. It was just embarrassing. He was shredded live on television. Absolutely shredded. They may as well have put him through a physical shredder for what he looked like when he was answering these questions. He was either making it up, he was repeating back what he'd been told by, you know, people in his ears to say, and it just made the situation worse and worse and worse. But let's look at some of these. There's some of these U-turns, shall we, Tom? I mean, I don't know if can you see it all right? Do you want to read some of these out, or just one or two out? If I go through them first.
You go ahead, pick out one or two for us there, Jace. It's a good article with that. Is it 8 different examples?
Yes. I mean, I don't know where to start, to be honest, because I think this is just examples of extremely quick ones. This is not the examples of all the U-turns either. This is just the ones that they've effectively done. I mean, the PM and Chancellor skipping self-isolation, as you just said. Around 8 a.m. on Sunday, Downing Street announced Mr. Johnson, Mr. Sunak, you were right.
Oh, it was Sunak, yeah.
Would not be self-isolating despite being contacted by NHS Test and Trace after Health Secretary Sajid Javid tested positive for COVID. Number 10 said the Prime Minister and Chancellor would instead be tested daily as part of a pilot scheme. But little more than 2.5 hours later, and following a huge outcry, it was announced both now would go into quarantine. The news came just after Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick. So he was gaslighting the country live on television, while Sunak and Johnson had already been told and had changed their minds and were doing something else. And a complete
I mean, you can imagine, Jenrick, you can imagine these, you know, these poor suckers. I mean, they're complicit, so I'm not going to, poor suckers is the wrong word, but they reel out, you know, these underlings to go on telly and defend these appalling positions that they're taking, these appalling actions and decisions, you know, and to try and defend them, which they do. And then there's a U-turn. I mean, it makes them look ridiculous. You can almost imagine them being told in there, this is the government's position and we defend it. It's the right decision. Oh no, hold on. No, I'm hearing it's the wrong decision. No, it's the wrong decision. We've changed it. We've now changed to what is the right decision. I mean, that would be hilarious, wouldn't it, if that actually happened in real time?
I think people are already doing that satire, to be fair, on social media, and it's brilliant. They're sitting in another room, aren't they? And they're basically advising through the earpiece. It's brilliant.
Oh yes.
But they've rated these U-turns. You've got supersonic, you've got Formula One, you've got U-turn speed, nippy hatchback, you've got U-turn speed, family estate, U-turn speed, nippy hatchback. So they've actually given them brilliant names. It's wonderful. People need to go on and read this. Back to Formula One again. But you know, it's just.
And there's big issues there, you know, not just COVID related, but you know,
yeah, of course, there's across the board.
You know, issues about race and society,
trade deals,
free school meals, you know, so many things where they take an appalling position and then either just there's a public outcry or they are shamed, you know, including by a 22-year-old footballer, you know, shamed into realizing that their position is disgusting and verging on fascistic and murderous, and then they change.
Oh,
because of
just picking up there, just to finish off, picking up the 23-year-old footballer now, Marcus Rashford. What do? They get their mates at the Spectator to try and create a story, a complete non-story, saying he's profiting from his charity work, in order to undermine him. Instead of listening to him, instead of thinking he's saying some great stuff here, we can learn from this. All they want to do is stab him in the back and create this public perception that he's like them. He'll never be like them. It's impossible to get that low, even if he wanted to.
I mean, absolutely despicable from the Spectator to attack him in that completely unfounded, unjust way. Totally despicable, disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a man, apart from feeding our kids and getting them, you know, 80,000 kids have got their own books, you know, through his partnership with Macmillan. You know, how many millions of kids have had free school meals, including in the school holidays, when otherwise they'd be starving under this government because of Rashford. It's a man who gives all his wealth away. He's top of the Forbes list. I give 125% of his wealth away.
He is, yes.
I don't even know how you give more than 100% away. But he's basically given to charity more money than he's got. I guess he's already pledged some of his future earnings. And they attack him as if he's trying to profit from things. What a joke. What a ridiculous joke they are at the Spectator.
Yeah. But of course, white supremacists, racist, that's the backdrop, unfortunately, for these far-right mags. So that's got to be part of the rationale. Oh, right.
They have a long history. The Spectator has a long history of racist content, including when Johnson was the chief editor.
Yes.
You know, articles. When he was editor, there was an article published suggesting that black people have lower IQs than white people, which is, you know, A, disgusting, and B, you know, scientifically proven to be utter hogwash.
Yes.
You know, racist hogwash. And yet he decides that's fine to go ahead and print an article like that.
Yeah.
Oh.
I know. And then he becomes Prime Minister. That's the end of the show, Tom.
Good. Yes. I hope people enjoy this interview, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks, Jace.
Yeah. You take care. Enjoy this lovely weather.
Cheers, Jace. Yay.
Take care, Tom.
Cheers, everyone. Bye. Bye.